Hello, it's nice to meet you. Last time I read a letter sent by a father. What he wanted to share with other parents was that he had tried tirelessly to fix his child's autistic tendencies, but in the process, his child got hurt, his spouse got hurt, and above all, he felt that his own soul was becoming increasingly exhausted and embittered. That was the story he shared. And he said that he shifted his focus from his child to himself. And instead of fighting against autism, he is now trying to accept it as a member of the family and learn how to live together with it. That was the gist of what he shared. A little while after filming this video, I met some parents who also have children with disabilities, and all of their children were high school students. I had a meeting with parents who were curious about how to help their children prepare for college. While we did talk about the college preparation process that they were interested in, we also discussed questions like these together. Does the child really want to go to college? Why do the parents want to send their child to college? And what happens if the child can't go to college or chooses not to go? And what if after graduating from college they can't find a job? As we discussed these topics, the conversation naturally turned to what the child wants, communication with the child, and the parent-child relationship. The conversation began with the technical aspects of preparing for college, but as we discussed the questions mentioned above, we came to agree that, in the end, the most important thing is the relationship between parent and child. This is a topic very similar to the letter from a father that I read to you last time. After the meeting, I asked the participants which parts they found helpful and if there was anything they would like to share with parents who currently have young children. So I would like to introduce a few of the responses they sent me. The first mother said, I really resonated with the idea that the emotional relationship between parent and child is the only channel through which a child with autism can communicate with society. In my case, my child's difficulty in regulating emotions became so severe that medication was necessary. But as both my child and I started receiving counseling, many aspects began to improve. Especially after I quit my job, my own stress decreased, and I found myself spending more and more time having everyday conversations with my child. I realized that my impatience, wanting my child who cannot change to behave like a typical child, only ended up provoking my child even more. In the end, I came to realize once again that the only thing I can change is myself. Another mother shared her experience as follows. Among the conversations I had with the teacher, what helped me the most was the process of parents coming to accept their child's autism. Even after my child had already been diagnosed, I kept wondering, what if my child actually has ADHD and was misdiagnosed with autism? Or sometimes I would think, if a high-functioning child receives various types of education, maybe they can live like a typical child. The explanation about why an autism diagnosis is necessary and how to accept a child's disability was extremely helpful. Additionally, the discussion about the importance of considering the child's own wishes rather than the mother's ambitions when making decisions about the child's future, such as college entrance or employment, was also very helpful. One point that would be helpful for other parents is that it is truly important not to follow the parent's desires, but instead to provide the child with opportunities to make decisions freely within a safe boundary. I also hope that other parents realize that a healthy relationship between parent and child is essential for smooth communication between them. However, what I find regrettable is that I myself do not know how to communicate effectively with my child. I hope that there will be parent education seminars. Those were some of the opinions shared. Also, someone else said that what resonated with them most was the advice to give children options, to choose from themselves, so that it becomes a voluntary challenge for them to achieve their goals. So today, I will try to summarize the discussions we had in this seminar and the points that people hoped would be shared with other families. First, the only way for a child with autism to communicate with society is through the emotional bond and healthy communication between parent and child. Second, instead of following the parent's desires, it is important to acknowledge the child's difficulties and provide them with various options, giving them the opportunity to make their own decisions. And it is about playing a role in helping them achieve what they have chosen for themselves. There are these two main topics. So today I will start by talking about the first topic. As I mentioned, the first topic is that only an emotionally healthy relationship and communication between parent and child can serve as the sole channel for a child with autism to communicate with society. Why is that? In fact, this applies to all families with non-disabled children as well. But in those families, even if this aspect doesn't go well, the children can still carve out their own futures. So there are at least some alternatives. However, in the case of developmental disabilities, if the child cannot carve out their own future, the parents ultimately have to provide a certain level of support. And the lack of other alternatives is the major difference. There is probably no one who would deny this. The real question is how urgently we feel this, and whether we actually apply and put it into practice. This is because there are many families who struggle when such a relationship is not established after puberty. I am currently creating videos by selecting topics that are appropriate for each age group. But then, why am I trying to talk about conversations I've had with parents of high school students during the period when I'm sharing experiences related to elementary school? The reason is that if you try to build a healthy relationship with your child only after they enter puberty, it is already too late. Such relationships need to be well established, starting from kindergarten and elementary school. If there are relationships that have been poorly formed over the past 10, 15, or 20 years, it is extremely difficult to turn those relationships around for the better. Unfortunately, many parents with children in kindergarten or elementary school tend to overlook the importance of this aspect. When I think about why that might be, I suspect it's because they focus too impatiently on treatment, or perhaps because they are too intent on fixing their child. Once children enter adolescence and close themselves off, it becomes very difficult to have conversations with them. When they graduate from high school, the problem becomes even more challenging. The same goes for after they graduate from college. If they are unable to get a job or don't have any friends, they will likely want to stay at home. And if the parent-child relationship is strained at that time, it creates difficulties for the entire family. It's not that having your child at home is wrong. Even if they are at home, as long as the child has no issues and the parents are fully accepting of it, then there is no problem. The difficulty arises when the child wants to stay at home, but the parents find it increasingly hard to see their child at home all the time. This is when it becomes a struggle for both sides. To help you understand better, let me lay out a scenario. There are generally three main situations that can happen when a child graduates from high school. One is going to college, another is getting a job, and the last one is staying at home. Let me first talk about the case where the child ends up staying at home. And there are two situations within this as well. One is participating in a day program or other individual programs with government support, and the other is staying at home without any government assistance. I will set aside a separate time later to explain government support programs in detail. Since this applies to many people with developmental disabilities, the government provides various forms of support. However, there are cases where a child has not been diagnosed, or even if they have, they are not eligible for government support. Even without any support, if they have friends and are able to spend enjoyable time on their own, there shouldn't be any major problems. However, for people with developmental disabilities, making friends is difficult, and they often don't spend much time with friends, so they end up staying at home. The second case is when they go to college. Although this is not very common. Until they graduate from college, they just need to attend diligently, just like they did in high school. The problem is whether they can get a job after graduating from college. In fact, if someone can graduate from college and get a regular job, it would not be an exaggeration to say that they don't have a disability. Since we're talking about people with developmental disabilities, graduating from college is still somewhat possible. But getting a job is a completely different story. Getting into college is a game without competitors, but getting a job is a game with competitors. No matter how much I want it, if the employer doesn't hire me, there's nothing I can do. Unless there's a law requiring the hiring of people with disabilities, which there isn't in Canada. In Korea, there is a law requiring a certain percentage of employees to be people with disabilities, but even then, it often only applies to those with physical disabilities. Unless there are some significant incentives for employers, which there aren't, people with disabilities ultimately have to compete for jobs under the same conditions as those without disabilities. That's why it's rare for people with developmental disabilities to get hired. Even if an employer hires someone with good intentions, it often doesn't last long. The main reason is a lack of social skills or communication abilities. If someone has a very special talent, the situation might be different, but that's not usually the case. So personally, I think that when it comes to employment issues for people with developmental disabilities, we need to create jobs and environments that they can actually work in. I think it's really difficult for them to get a job at an existing company. When preparing for college, some parents believe that everything will be solved as long as their child gets into college. But college is just one step in the process. Graduating from college doesn't mean you'll immediately get a job. College is something you pay to attend, whereas employment is a game where you get paid by an employer, so they're completely different stories. But does that mean going to college is meaningless? No, it doesn't. My own child also graduated from college. Even though finding a job wasn't easy, there are still plenty of valid reasons to go to college, even if you don't end up getting a job. If your child enjoys it, wants to learn more, wants to acquire skills at college, wants to experience college life, or wants to make friends there, and so on, there are countless reasons to attend college. Even if you don't get a job, you can still use the skills and knowledge you gained in college to do something on your own. My own child is doing just that right now. However, the idea that graduating from college will immediately lead to a job and solve all problems is different from reality. Now let's move on to the third case. This is when someone gets a job right after graduating from high school. If you are able to get a job normally and continue working, then this situation is also not a problem. The problem is if you can't get a job, it's not much different from the situations I mentioned earlier. Now let's consider what happens if, in any of the three cases mentioned above, the person ends up staying at home. I'll lay out a scenario for you. Since the child doesn't have anything in particular to do, there's a high chance they'll spend most of their time on the computer, playing games or being online. Most children like computers after all. If neither the child nor the parents see any problem with this, then it's not an issue. The problem is that parents who witness this often feel very frustrated, even though the child insists that they're fine. Then no matter how much you try not to, nagging inevitably starts. Of course, it's for the child's sake. For example, don't stay up too late at night. Go to bed and wake up on time. Eat your meals right when you're called to eat. At least clean up the dishes you've eaten from. Do the dishes. Go outside and take a walk. Clean your room. If you stare at the computer all day, your eyesight will get worse. It's bad for your health. You end up saying these things for your child's sake. Even so, if it stops here, it's not too bad. But if it gets worse, other things start to come out. What are you going to become if you keep living like this? Don't you have any friends? Sometimes you end up yelling, and sometimes when you're angry, you even curse. Situations like this tend to happen not when the child's disability is severe, but more often when the child is almost normal. It seems this happens when parents don't fully understand their child's difficulties. From the child's perspective, it's not something they wanted, and they're living that way because they have no choice. If they hear things like this, would they really be able to confide their difficulties to their parents, especially when there's no one around to confide in or receive comfort from? If I were in the situation of such a child, what would I hope for? I hope you will take a moment to think about this as well. This child has no one else. Only their parents are the sole channel through which they can confide their struggles, receive comfort, regain strength, and try again. Parents are the last bastion of communication with society. No matter how difficult the situation, only parents are the last refugee their child can rely on. Since today's session is quite long, we'll stop here for now. Next time, we'll continue with this topic and move on to the next subject, giving children the opportunity to make their own choices and becoming a supporter who helps them achieve what they have chosen on their own. Thank you for watching until now.